going to be one of those things where I always refer to Eddie Goldman as kind of the glue that holds the Bears defense together because, and you guys alluded to this, I mean, he's up there, he's taking on these double teams, and then what does that do? That frees up Akeem Hicks, and then that also frees up guys like Khalil Mack, and then it impacts your linebackers as well, because in Danny Trevathan and especially Roquan Smith, they can kind of just roam freely, but the Bears also lost a lot on the defensive line this offseason. I mean, you lost the defensive line coach Jay Rogers, who pretty much helped build the unit up alongside Vic Fangio, but then you lose Brent Urban, you lose Roy Robertson Harrison. Okay, you have Angelo Blackson and Kyrus Tonga, not really major options. I mean, Mario Edwards Jr. is back, but outside of Akeem Hicks and Bilal Nichols, every single person that you have on that roster right now, in the defensive line room right now, all these players, they're all just rotational guys that are going to play like 10 to 15 snaps, maybe 20 snaps a game if lucky. So it's one of those things to monitor going forward. And then just looking at Mike Pennell, again, a guy that you're just signing at this point because as insurance for Eddie Goldman in case Eddie Goldman's not ready to go by the time training camp comes around. And I think that if Eddie Goldman's not in camp, then you know what? That's when you begin to hit panic button. You're like, okay, we have a legitimate issue on our hands here. But I think just in general, the Bears have kind of weathered this Goldman storm really well so far. It could also just be a situation where they're like, hey, look, we know you opted out last year. We don't want to throw you back into action. We're going to kind of continue to ease you into all this. And I really think that that's what it is more than anything, because what's weird is Ryan Pace was asked about Eddie Goldman the last time Pace spoke to the media, and Pace was like, oh yeah, he'll be back. Sean Desai was asked the same thing, he'll be back. But you have Marquise Goodwin and Damian Williams both opted out last year. They're pretty much participating at full speed, and we haven't heard a single thing from Eddie Goldman. Now, I think what's more interesting is that if Eddie Goldman was truly ready to be back, I'm sure he would have spoken to the media at some point. But switching over to the offensive side of the ball here, because I see Bryson's got a comment in the chat, and thanks for all the support, Bryson. We appreciate you because you're tuning into like everything we do here at Bear Report. But you know, Bryson mentions looks like Marquise Goodwin is already having an effect. I thought what was interesting, and Matt Nagy alluded to this, and I think it was his press conference, might have been Wednesday or Thursday, about how Goodwin is basically in shape and he's looking great out there. But what Nagy mentioned specifically was kind of Goodwin's Olympic style regimen and routine that's keeping him in shape. In minicamp and OTAs, you kind of just lay the foundation for what's really going to come. And ultimately, these guys are going to get into more details when we do get into minicamp. And when I say details, I just mean you're going to see a lot more and hear a lot more when the Bears are, well, I should say just see a lot more when the Bears are actually out there practicing at Hallis Hall. When you also look at Chicago, I mean, from the perspective that that's going to be the true evaluation period. Now, what stuck out to me, because you guys mentioned preseason, was that Matt Nagy mentioned how during the second preseason game at home against the Buffalo Bills, he's going to be playing the starters a majority of the time in that game. Now, typically that would be the third preseason game, but because there's only 3 now with the extra regular season game added, I think that whoever starts in that game could kind of be telling of what to expect throughout the final stages of August and right up until before the regular season. Because if we see Andy Dalton trot out there, then it's going to give me the feeling, I think you probably going to have a feeling that Dalton's the one that's starting week 1. But if Dalton's not the one that's out there and it's Justin Fields, that's going to be something big as well. So that second preseason game is something to keep an eye on. So Justin Fields talked about this in his presser yesterday, and he was just like, hey, listen, I've been here before, because effectively right now he technically is QB2. And what he alluded to was this, that look, I've been in this situation before. I got to Georgia, I was a backup to Jake Fromm. I played a couple games my freshman season, but then all of a sudden I went ahead and I transferred to Ohio State. Ultimately, what that basically means is he's ready to continue proving himself once again. But also just looking at it, you know, on my other podcast, Fireside Bears, I had an opportunity to interview Caitlin Rose Sharkey, who works for Fox 32. And one of the things Caitlin talked about was that the wide receivers last year, they legitimately just said that, hey, listen, we felt like last offseason in training camp was such a QB competition position. There was a focus more so on the quarterbacks than there was of trying to figure out chemistry with the wide receivers. Now, when you look at that, ultimately what that screams is that the Bears have to go into training camp again in about 6 weeks here with the mindset and philosophy of, we know we should have a better idea of who the starter is, but also we can't sacrifice and alternate these quarterbacks between reps or between days just so that the chemistry with wide receivers is sacrificed. Because ultimately, when you look at it, I mean, Andy Dalton is a rookie in this offense, but so is Justin Fields, because Andy's got a relationship, he's got a past history with offensive coordinator Bill Lazor, but ultimately he hasn't actually played in a game yet, so we don't really know what kind of Andy Dalton we're getting. We don't know if we're getting the Andy Dalton that put up a really bad 2019 season in Cincinnati and the Dallas Andy Dalton, or if we're getting the Andy Dalton that was the reason that the Bengals made the playoffs for 4 straight years, or one of the reasons I should. Yeah, last thing here, but I see another comment. Why do people keep saying Pace and Nagy don't have one more year? And that's the, I guess, last thing we'll answer before we officially end this thing and jump off. But I'll go, here's my thing, is I think when you look at everyone that's local here that's covering the Bears, like us, for example, one of the consensus seems to be from everyone that's here locally is that Pace and Nagy definitely have more than 1 year left, because Justin Fields is buying them so much time. I mean, the plan is this: get through 2021, get Fields the reps he needs, see the steady incremental growth and development that both Pace and Nagy have hinted at in the past. And then what that will do is, at the end of the season, you go to Ted Phillips and ownership and say, look at what our guy did. This is why you need to keep us around. That's ultimately the scenario. Now, the reason people keep saying that Pace and Nagy don't have more than a year, or they're on the hot seat heading into 2021 and Chicago's the hottest seat of all, it's just this narrative that's created by the national media. Because if you look at what's being said locally versus what ESPN and CBS Sports and NFL Network are saying, the consensus among the national media is that Chicago is in fact the hottest seat in the NFL, and that really Pace, the next regime is going to come in here. They're not going to have a first round pick, but they're going to be tied to Justin Fields. I don't see it that way. I think if you're Bears ownership and you're George McCaskey, you realize more than anything that, forget what the national media is saying, you have to give Pace and Nagy at least 2 or 3 seasons to figure out if you can get it right with Justin Fields, I should say.